The Homeless Heiress. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Before we jump into this story that's going to move you to your core, I have a question for you. What do you usually do while listening to our stories? Are you sipping on some afternoon tea? Cooking a nice meal? Maybe taking a late afternoon stroll? Let me know in the comments. Today, I'm bringing you a tale that will deeply touch your heart. Imagine a young woman of just 22, a dedicated student in Cambridge, whose life is completely shattered by a betrayal. Abandoned on the street with nowhere to go, she endures days of cold until a billionaire finds her shivering on a sidewalk. But this man carries a past that explains why he couldn't simply walk by as anyone else might. What you're about to discover is a journey of love, resilience, and second chances. You'll see how two hearts, scarred by the past, find healing in each other. And just when you think you know where the story is going, a revelation will change everything and test if true love can really overcome any obstacle. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to our channel and like this video if you're touched by what you hear. Isabella had always believed that life's plans were simple and beautiful. At 22, she had come from a small town to study in Cambridge, carrying the dreams her humble family had placed in her. She was the first in her family to get into a university, and that was no small feat for a girl who grew up watching her parents work from dawn to dusk to provide the basics for their children. Her brown eyes sparkled every time she called home and told her mother about her classes and how she was learning things she never imagined existed. Her father, a man of few words, always ended their calls by saying he was very proud of her, and that was enough fuel for Isabella to face any difficulty. Her routine in Cambridge had become predictable and comfortable over the 2 years she lived in the city. She would wake up early, go to university, and return to the small apartment she shared with Marco, her boyfriend of 3 years. It was a relationship that had started in their last year of high school, when he went to study in the same city, and promised they would build a life together. Marco was 2 years older, had a charming way of speaking, and always said the right words at the right time. Isabella felt lucky to have someone who loved her and was willing to share his dreams with her. The apartment was simple, but it was their little corner of the world, where she prepared dinner every night, and where they planned the future they would build after graduation. On that Thursday afternoon, Isabella had returned from the university early because her professor had canceled the last class. She was excited, thinking of preparing a surprise for Marco, maybe that chocolate cake he adored. She climbed the 2 flights of stairs of their humble building, pulling her key from her bag and mentally rehearsing the joyful expression he would make when he got home and found the house smelling of homemade cake. But when she opened the door, what she found was very different from what she expected. The living room was strangely messy, with clothes thrown on the floor, and there were 2 wine glasses on the coffee table. Her heart pounded, but she still tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe Marco had a friend over to study, and they had made a mess. It was then that she heard noises coming from the bedroom, muffled laughter, whispers, sounds she knew all too well. Her legs trembled, and for a moment she thought of leaving, pretending she hadn't seen anything, coming back later, and acting as if nothing had happened. But something inside her, perhaps the dignity she inherited from her hard-working parents, made her walk to the bedroom door. What she saw when she opened that door was an image that would be etched in her memory forever. Marco was in bed with a woman she knew by sight, a colleague from his college, a rich blonde who always looked at Isabella with a certain disdain. They were so engrossed with each other that they didn't even notice when she opened the door. It was only when Isabella let out a muffled cry of pain that they turned and saw her standing there, with her world collapsing at her feet. Marco's reaction was even worse than the betrayal itself. He didn't show a shred of remorse or shame. He got out of bed with a coldness Isabella had never seen in him, grabbed a t-shirt, and looked at her as if she were an intruder in her own home. "Isabella, we need to talk," he said, with a calmness that made her even more desperate. The other woman stayed in bed, in what was once their bed, without even the decency to cover herself or show any kind of embarrassment. It was as if Isabella were invisible, as if she didn't matter at all in that situation. Marco put on his pants and motioned for her to leave the room. "Let's go to the living room. Let's resolve this like adults," he said. And in that moment, Isabella realized that the man standing in front of her was not the same one who had promised her eternal love. In the living room, Marco sat on the sofa, as if he were the absolute owner of the space, and looked at Isabella with an expression that mixed impatience and irritation. "Look, Isabella, I didn't want you to find out this way, but maybe it's better like this. The truth is, I'm tired. I'm tired of this life of pretending we're a happy couple. I'm tired of having to put up with your small-town dreams and your family from the countryside," he said, each word a stab to her heart. Isabella's legs gave way, and she leaned against the wall, trying to process what she was hearing. "I never wanted anything serious anyway. I never wanted a real commitment, and I definitely never wanted kids or a family. Sophia understands me. She has the same goals as me. She comes from a family who can help me get ahead in life," Marco continued, mentioning the name of the woman who was still in their bedroom. Isabella tried to speak, to argue, to remind him of all the plans they had made, of all the promises he had made to her and her parents. But Marco cut her off with an impatient wave of his hand. "That's enough, Isabella. I don't want any more drama. You have until tomorrow morning to get your things and get out of here. The apartment is in my name, so don't give me any nonsense about rights. You'll have to figure it out on your own now," he said, getting up and heading toward the bedroom, as if the conversation was over. Isabella just stood there, feeling as if the ground had disappeared from under her feet. Everything she had built over the last 3 years, all the dreams, all the certainties, had turned to dust in a matter of minutes. Isabella spent the night wide awake, sitting on the living room floor, listening to the sounds coming from the bedroom and feeling like a stranger in her own home. She packed her clothes in an old suitcase, took the few belongings that were truly hers, and left the apartment before the sun had fully risen. She didn't have the courage to call her parents. She couldn't explain that all the dreams they had placed in her had crumbled overnight. Besides, she knew they couldn't help. Her father worked as a bricklayer, and her mother did cleaning jobs to supplement the family income. They could barely keep the house they lived in, and they wouldn't have money to pay for a bus ticket, much less support her back in her hometown. The first few days on the street were a cruel lesson in how unforgiving life could be. Isabella slept under awnings and on park benches, always trying to find places where she wouldn't bother anyone and where she wouldn't attract the attention of the police. Hunger set in on the second day, a cramping in her stomach that she had never felt before. She tried asking for help in a few places, but people looked at her with suspicion or simply acted as if she were invisible. The shame was almost greater than the hunger. She, who had always been a studious and hard-working girl, was now on the street, begging for a plate of food or a place to sleep. The nights were the worst, especially when the Cambridge cold bit, and she had nothing but a thin cat to protect her. After a week of living like that, Isabella was visibly debilitated. She hadn't been able to take a proper shower, her clothes were dirty and wrinkled, and she felt herself getting sick. A dry cough had started to bother her, and she felt chills even when the sun was out. It was as if her body was giving up the fight, as if all hope had been exhausted, along with her physical strength. On that Friday morning, she had curled up on a sidewalk near the city center, shivering from the cold and trying to make herself small so as not to bother the people hurrying by to their commitments. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Julian Bennett was finishing another day of work at the construction company he had built, with a lot of sweat and determination. At 32, He was the owner of one of the largest construction firms in the region, but few knew the story behind that success. Julian had a rigid and solitary routine. He woke up early, went to the office, solved problems, closed contracts, and returned home after 9 o'clock at night. He had no time for relationships, no patience for people he considered weak or lazy. His life had a single purpose: to work and make money. Always more money, as if that could forever erase the painful memories he had carried since childhood. Julian's childhood had been marked by a poverty he swore he would never feel again. He and his mother, Eleanor, had lived on the street when he was only 8 years old. His father had abandoned the family, leaving them homeless and penniless, and for almost 2 years, they lived by begging and sleeping wherever they could. Julian remembered perfectly the icy nights when he would huddle in his mother's lap, feeling her shiver with cold and fear. He remembered the people who walked past them as if they were garbage, without even looking them in the eye, without showing a shred of compassion. Those memories had shaped the man he became. Cold, calculating, someone who depended on no one, and who would never again be in need. That afternoon, Julian was driving home in his black truck, thinking about the contracts he had to review over the weekend. Traffic was heavy, as it always was at that time, and he was impatient to get home and end the day. It was when he passed a side street that led to his house that he saw a figure huddled on a sidewalk. It was a young girl, thin, with dirty clothes, visibly shivering from the cold. For a moment, their eyes met, and Julian saw pain he knew all too well in her face. She wasn't begging. She wasn't bothering anyone. She was just there, trying to survive, exactly as he and his mother had done so many years ago. Julian accelerated and drove on, as he always did. It wasn't his problem. It had nothing to do with the life he had built. But after driving 3 blocks, something strange happened. The image of that girl didn't leave his mind. He could perfectly see her eyes. He could feel the silent desperation she carried. It was as if an invisible force was pulling him back to that sidewalk. Without quite understanding what he was doing, Julian made a U-turn at the first opportunity and returned to the street where he had seen the girl. She was still there, in the same position, and when he stopped the car in front of her, Isabella looked up and eyed him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Julian got out of the car and walked toward her, feeling a strange sensation in his chest. It was as if he were seeing his past self, as if he were facing a chance to do what no one had done for him and his mother when they needed it most. Isabella looked at the man standing in front of and felt a mix of fear and confusion. He was tall, dressed in expensive clothes, and had a bearing that showed he was no ordinary person. His eyes were dark and serious, but there was something in them that didn't seem threatening. Still, she huddled even more. She was prepared to hear some complaint about occupying the sidewalk or some cruel comment about her situation. "What's your name?" Julian asked, his voice firm but carrying an unexpected gentleness. Isabella hesitated before answering, her voice coming out weak and hoarse from the cough that had bothered her for days. "Isabella," she said, looking down, ashamed of her own appearance. Julian knelt down to her level, and for the first time in many years, he let his childhood memories surface without trying to block them. He saw himself in that girl. He saw his mother. He saw all the pain and humiliation they had gone through when no one cared to help. "Isabella, you're sick," he said, noting the paleness of her face and the trembling that wasn't just from the cold. "How long have you been on the street?" he asked. And when she answered that it had been over a week, he felt a tightness in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. There was no logic in what he was about to do. There was no rational explanation, but there was something stronger than reason pulling him to help that girl. "Come with me," Julian said, extending his hand to Hidayamur. Isabella looked at the outstretched hand, as if it were a mirage, as if she couldn't believe that someone was actually offering help. "Why?" she asked, her eyes full of tears she was trying to hold back. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," he replied, not quite understanding why he had said that. Isabella took his hand with icy, trembling fingers, and when Julian helped her stand up, she almost fell. She was so weak. He held her by the arm and helped her walk to the truck, putting her old suitcase in the back seat. During the ride to his house, Isabella was silent, looking out the window and trying to understand what was happening. She couldn't believe a stranger was taking her somewhere, and a part of her was afraid of what might happen. But at the same time, she felt she no longer had the strength to worry about it. She was too exhausted to be afraid, too sick to think straight. Julian was also quiet during the ride, focused on the traffic. But from time to time, he would glance at her in the rearview mirror and see how debilitated she was. The more he looked at her, the more certain he was that he had done the right thing by bringing her with him. Julian's mansion was in one of the best areas of Cambridge, with an automatic gate and a well-kept garden that clearly showed the social difference between them. When the truck stopped in the garage, Isabella was impressed by the size of the house. It was bigger than any place she had ever lived, and that made her feel even more out of place and dirty. "Don't worry about that now," Julian said, as if he had read her thoughts. "Let's go inside so you can warm up and eat something." He helped her out of the truck and grabbed her suitcase. Inside the house, Isabella felt completely lost. Everything was luxurious and immaculate, from the furniture to the paintings on the walls. She was afraid to touch anything, afraid of dirtying or breaking something that certainly cost more money than she had seen in her entire life. Julian took her to a bathroom on the ground floor and told her to take a hot shower. "I'll leave clean clothes outside the door. They're my size, so they'll be big on you, but at least they'll be clean and warm," he said, with a kindness that completely contrasted with his serious appearance. Isabella went into this bathroom, and when she saw herself in the mirror, she was shocked by her own appearance. She was unrecognizable, thin, dirty, with deep, dark circles under her eyes. She started crying right there, both from relief at finally having a warm place and from shame at being in that situation. The hot shower was like a rebirth for Isabella. She stayed under the water for a long time, letting the heat penetrate her icy bones, and washing away not only the dirt, but also a little of the sadness she carried. When she came out of the bathroom, she found the clothes Julian had promised, a t-shirt and sweatpants that were huge on her, but were the most comfortable clothes she had worn in a long time. She went down to the kitchen, following the smell of food, and found Julian preparing soup. "You need to eat something light first. Your stomach won't handle heavy food," he said, without looking at her, focused on the stove. They ate in silence, she taking small sips of the hot soup and feeling as if each spoonful was bringing life back to her body. Julian discreetly watched her, noting how thin she was and how she coughed from time to time. After the soup, he took her to a guest room on the first floor, a cozy room with a large bed and thick blankets. "You'll sleep here tonight. We'll talk more tomorrow," he said, leaving some cough medicine on the nightstand. Isabella lay down on that soft bed, and for the first time in over a week, she felt safe. She didn't understand why that man was being so kind to her, but she was too grateful to question it. Isabella woke up the next day, not knowing what time it was. Sunlight was coming through the thick curtains, and it took her a few seconds to remember where she was. The mattress was so soft that she had slept deeply for the first time in a long time, without waking up multiple times during the night from cold or fear. When she got out of bed, she still felt weak, but she no longer had that terrible feeling that her body was giving up the fight. The cough still bothered her, but it wasn't as strong as the day before. She slowly went downstairs, following the smell of coffee that came from the kitchen, and found Julian sitting at the table, reading some papers and drinking black coffee. "Good morning," she said, her voice still hoarse, stopping at the kitchen entrance, not knowing if she could enter. Julian looked up from his papers and looked at her for a few seconds. She was wearing the same clothes from the day before, still too big for her thin body. But she no longer had that look of utter desperation she carried when he found her on the street. "Good morning, Isabella. How did you sleep?" he asked, gesturing for her to sit at the table. "Very well, thank you. It's been a while since I slept so soundly," she replied, sitting in the chair across from him and feeling like she was invading a space that wasn't hers. Julian got up and prepared a plate with bread, fruit, and a glass of warm milk for her. Isabella ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a gift. As she ate, they were silent, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was as if they were both trying to understand the strange situation they were in. "Why did you help me?" Isabella asked suddenly, stopping eating and looking directly into his eyes. The question caught Julian off guard, and he was silent for a few seconds, not knowing what to say. He himself didn't fully understand why he had done it. "I've been there before," Julian finally said, his voice lowering. "When I was a kid, my mother and I were on the street for almost 2 years. I know what it's like to be cold, hungry, and especially what it's like to have people walk past you as if you're invisible," he continued, stirring his coffee without looking at her. Isabella stopped chewing and looked at him with surprise. It was hard to imagine that well-dressed man, the owner of a luxurious house, having gone through the same situation she was living. "How did you manage to get off the street?" she asked, genuinely curious. "My mom got a job as a cleaner at a company, and they let us sleep in the storage room until we could rent a small room. I started working at 12, carrying construction materials, and I never stopped. I built this company brick by brick, contract by contract," Julian explained. And for the first time since they had met, Isabella saw a softer expression on his face. "You can stay here as long as you need to recover and get back on your feet. Don't worry about anything for now," he said. And Isabella felt her eyes fill with tears of gratitude. "I don't know how I'll ever repay so much kindness," she said, her voice choked up. "You don't need to repay anything. You just need to get better and take care of your health," Julian replied, getting up from the table. "I'm going to work, but there's food in the fridge. Do whatever you want. The house is big, and you can make yourself at home. I just ask you not to go into my office. There are important documents in there," he said, grabbing his car keys. Before he left, he stopped at the kitchen door and looked at her once more. "Isabella, you're too young to be going through this. I'm sure you'll be able to rebuild your life," he said, and left the house, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The following days established a strange but comfortable routine for them both. Isabella spent her mornings resting and recovering, but in the afternoon, she made a point of cleaning the house and preparing dinner for when Julian got home from work. It wasn't because he had asked her to. It was because she felt the need to contribute in some way, to show that she wasn't a moocher. Julian would get home every night between 8 and 9, tired from work, but in the last few days, he had noticed he felt a strange anticipation to get home. The house was no longer empty and silent as it had always been. It smelled of homemade food, a table was set with care, and someone was waiting for him. "You don't have to do this," Julian said one Tuesday when he came home and found a complete dinner waiting for him. "I know I don't, but I want to. It's the only way I have to thank you for everything you're doing for me," Isabella replied, serving his plate. "Besides, it's good for me to have something to do during the day. It helps me not to think too much about the bad things," she continued, sitting down at the table with him. They began to eat together every night, and their conversations became more and more natural and spontaneous. Isabella told him about her family in the countryside, about how she had been the first to get into a university, and about the dreams she had before everything fell apart. She talked about the betrayal, but without going into too many details, just saying that her boyfriend had chosen someone else and had kicked her out. Julian, in turn, told her more about his difficult childhood, about how he had built his company, and about how his life had always been focused only on work. "You never got married? Never wanted to build a family?" Isabella asked during one of these conversations. "I never had time for that. And honestly, I never trusted anyone enough to share my life with them," he replied. And Isabella sensed a deep sadness in that answer. As the days passed, Isabella began to notice small details about Julian that made her curious. He was a solitary man. That was obvious. But he was also much kinder than he tried to show. He always asked how she was feeling, if she needed anything, if the food was good. When she coughed a lot, he would bring her hot tea without her asking. When he realized she didn't have proper clothes, he left money on the table with a note telling her to buy whatever she needed. They were small gestures, but they showed a care that went far beyond simple charity. Julian, in turn, was discovering how good it was to get home and have someone to talk to. Isabella had a sweet way of speaking, asked interesting questions about his work, and showed a genuine interest in his life. She was intelligent, had her own opinions, and even after going through such a difficult situation, she hadn't lost the ability to smile and see the good things in life. He began to realize that he was anxious to get home, that he thought about her during the day, and that he worried if she was eating right or feeling lonely. 3 weeks after Isabella arrived at Julian's house, their routine had transformed into something neither of them expected. She had fully recovered from the flu and malnutrition, had gained a few pounds, and had color back in her face. Every morning she would wake up before him and prepare breakfast, leaving everything ready on the table before he came down for work. It was a moment of the day they had both started to cherish, sitting at the kitchen table, talking about his plans for the day or about the news she had seen on television. Julian had never had this kind of domestic routine and was discovering how pleasant it was to start the day with a quiet conversation. "I have a meeting with some investors from London today," Julian said on a Thursday morning while drinking the coffee she had prepared. "It must be important," Isabella replied, noting that he was a little more tense than usual. "It is. If it goes well, I'll be able to expand the company to other cities in the region," he explained. And Isabella noticed the glint of ambition in his eyes. "I'm sure everything will work out. You are very determined, and that makes all the difference," she said, with a sincerity that caught him off guard. Julian looked at her and felt something strange in his chest, a warm sensation he couldn't quite define. During the day, while Julian was at work, Isabella had created her own occupations in the house. She took care of the garden, organized the rooms, prepared elaborate meals, and sometimes read the books in his library. It was a house too big for one person, and she had realized that Julian lived a very simple life, despite all the wealth he had achieved. He didn't receive visitors, didn't have photos of friends or family around the house, and had no hobbies or leisure activities. It was as if he had built that luxurious life, but didn't know how to enjoy it. That afternoon, Isabella was tidying up the living room when she decided to take a closer look at Julian's personal belongings. On a shelf, she found some old photos, including one of a thin boy next to a woman who was clearly struggling. It was Julian as a child with his mother, and the image clearly showed the poverty they had faced. Isabella felt her heart ache when she saw that photo, understanding better why he had felt compassion for her situation. They had much more in common than she had imagined at the beginning. When Julian got home that night, Isabella immediately noticed that he was different. He had a discreet smile on his face and seemed more relaxed than usual. Did the meeting go well? She asked, while serving the dinner she had prepared, especially for a celebration, in case the news was good. Better than I expected. They agreed to invest in the expansion, and in 6 months, we're going to open branches in 3 cities, he said. And for the first time since they had met, Isabella saw Julian genuinely happy. That's wonderful. You deserve all this success, she said, with a sincerity that moved him. You know what's funny? Julian said after they finished dinner and were talking in the living room. During the whole meeting, I kept thinking about getting home to tell you the news. I've never had anyone to share these things with, he continued, looking at her with a new intensity. Isabella felt her heart race with those words. She had also realized that her feelings for him had evolved far beyond gratitude. When he got home at night, she felt a genuine happiness. When he smiled at her, she felt butterflies in her stomach. When his fingers sometimes brushed against hers when passing plates, she felt an electricity that left her confused. Julian, I need to tell you something, Isabella said, gathering the courage to be honest about what she was feeling. I know you brought me here to help me, and I'm eternally grateful for that. But what's happening between us? It's not just gratitude on my part, she said, her heart beating so fast she was sure he could hear it. Julian was silent for a few seconds, processing her words. He had also realized that his feelings had changed, that she was no longer just someone he was helping, but someone who had become essential in his life. Isabella, he began, but was interrupted by the doorbell. It was a strange time for visitors, and Julian wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, he was faced with Eleanor, his mother, holding a small suitcase and with an irritated expression on her face. Julian, I need to stay here for a few days. They're fighting with the building manager at my place, and they're renovating the apartment next to mine. The noise is unbearable, she said, walking into the house without waiting for an invitation. Eleanor stopped when she saw Isabella in the living room, and her expression immediately changed from irritation to suspicion. Who is this girl? Eleanor asked, looking Isabella up and down with a look that made her feel completely out of place. Mom, this is Isabella. She's staying here for a while, Julian said, trying to stay calm. Staying? Since when do you host strangers in your house? Eleanor asked, with a tone that made it clear she didn't like the situation at all. Isabella got up from the armchair and introduced herself politely, but Eleanor just nodded, not showing any sympathy. Julian, I need to talk to you in the kitchen, Eleanor said, pulling her son by the arm. Isabella stayed in the living room, hearing the muffled conversation coming from the kitchen, and could make out a few words like moocher, gold digger, and be careful. Her heart pounded with anxiety. She knew that Julian's mother's arrival would complicate everything, especially now that they had just admitted that there was something more than friendship between them. When Julian came back to the living room, he had a tense expression on his face. I'm sorry about that, Isabella. My mom is sometimes a little overly protective, he finished, clearly embarrassed by the situation. I understand. It's normal for her to be worried to find a stranger in her son's house, Isabella replied, trying to be understanding, but feeling a lump in her throat. The magic of the moment they had shared had been completely broken, and now she felt like an intruder again, like someone who didn't belong there. The conversation they had started would have to wait, because now there was a new dynamic in the house, and Isabella had a feeling it wasn't going to be easy. Julian's mom has just walked in on a very delicate moment. What do you think will happen now? Will Eleanor's presence ruin their chance at happiness? What advice would you give Julian to handle this situation? The following days in the house became extremely tense. Eleanor made a point of showing her disapproval of Isabella's presence in every way possible. During breakfast, she would make snide comments about people who take advantage of others' kindness and girls who appear out of nowhere with ulterior motives. When Isabella was preparing lunch, Eleanor would complain about the seasoning, saying the food was either too bland or too salty. She always found something to criticize. The atmosphere of the house which had become so welcoming and harmonious, was now charged with hostility. "Julian, you need to open your eyes," Eleanor said one morning after Isabella had gone upstairs to tidy the room. "This girl appeared out of nowhere. You don't know anything about her family, about her past, and now she's doing everything to win you over, preparing food, taking care of the house as if she owns it. That's what every gold digger does," she continued, with a conviction that deeply irritated Julian. "Mom, Isabella is not a gold digger. She went through a difficult situation, and I decided to help." "That's it," he replied, trying to end the conversation. But Eleanor was not willing to give up. "Have you forgotten where we came from? Have you forgotten how people treated us when we were destitute? And now you're playing the good guy for a stranger who probably invented a sad story to get to you," Eleanor said. And those words hit Julian like a punch to the stomach. "Don't talk about Isabella like that. You don't know her story. You don't know what she's been through," he said, feeling anger grow in his chest. "I know exactly how it works, my son. These poor girls always have a sad story to tell. They're always victims of something. And you, who have always been so smart in business, are being a fool with a woman," Eleanor retorted. Isabella, who had come downstairs silently to get a glass of water, heard the whole conversation from the stairs. Every word from Eleanor was like a knife to her heart. She felt tears well up and ran back to the room, where she locked herself in and cried until she couldn't anymore. She knew that Julian's mother had the right to protect her son, but it hurt so deeply to be seen as a moocher when everything she felt for him was genuine. Even worse was the fear that Eleanor would manage to convince Julian that she really was no good. During that week of tension, Isabella began to feel some strange symptoms that she initially attributed to the stress of the situation. She felt morning sickness, especially when she smelled coffee, and a strange dizziness that bothered her during the day. At first, she thought it was a consequence of all the emotional pressure she was living under, the constant insecurity of having Eleanor watching her every move. But when the nausea became more frequent, and she realized her period was late, a terrible thought began to form in her mind. One afternoon, when Julian was at work, and Eleanor had gone out to run some errands, Isabella decided to go to a nearby pharmacy to buy a pregnancy test. The walk there was a torture, with her trying to calculate the dates and realizing that there was a real possibility she was pregnant. The last intimate encounter she had with Marco had been a few weeks before the betrayal came to light. And now, doing the math, she realized the timing was perfect. She bought the test with trembling hands and went back home, praying she was wrong. The positive result on the test left her in a state of total shock. She sat in the bathroom for almost an hour, staring at those two lines that completely changed the course of her life. She was pregnant with the child of the man who had betrayed and abandoned her. The man who had said he never wanted a commitment or kids. And worse, she was pregnant while living in the house of another man, a man she was falling madly in love with. The situation couldn't be more complicated and painful. That night, during dinner, Isabella could barely eat. Julian noticed she was acting strange, pale and quiet, but he attributed it to the stress of living with Eleanor. "Are you okay? You don't look well," he asked, genuinely concerned. "I'm just a little tired," Isabella lied. Eleanor, always observant, noticed the strangeness in Isabella's behavior and made a malicious comment. "Must be a guilty conscience from someone who's deceiving everyone." In the following days, Isabella became a nervous wreck. The morning sickness worsened, and she had to make a huge effort to hide the symptoms from Julian, and especially from Eleanor. She knew that if Eleanor discovered she was pregnant, she would use it as another weapon against her, saying she was trying to pull the baby trap or something. The weight of the secret was becoming unbearable, and she knew she wouldn't be able to hide it for long. "Julian, I need to talk to you, Isabella said one night after Eleanor had retired to her room. They were in the living room, and her hands were sweating with nervousness. Of course, go ahead, he said, noticing from her expression that it was something serious. Isabella took a deep breath, trying to find the right words to say something that could destroy everything they had built together. It's about my past, about what happened to me before you found me, she began. Julian leaned forward, giving her his full attention. I didn't tell you the whole truth about what happened with my ex-boyfriend, Isabella said, her voice trembling. He didn't just betray me and kick me out. I found out today that I'm pregnant with his baby, she said, and the words came out like a painful confession. The silence that followed was deafening. Julian stared at her, processing the information, and Isabella saw several expressions cross his face: surprise, confusion, and something she couldn't identify. Are you sure? He finally asked in a low voice. I am. I took the test yesterday, Isabella replied, starting to cry. I understand if you want me to leave. I understand that this changes everything between us. I just didn't want to lie to you, not after everything you've done for me, she said, sobbing. Julian, I swear I didn't know when you brought me here. I just found out, and I'm terrified because I don't know what to do. He made it clear that he never wanted kids, and I don't have money, I don't have a home, I have nothing to offer a child, she continued, completely desperate. Julian was silent for several minutes, looking at Isabella, who was crying desperately in front of him. He processed not only the information that she was pregnant, but also the entire complexity of the situation. He saw a 22-year-old girl, completely lost and scared, carrying the child of a man who had cruelly abandoned her. It was a situation that demanded much more than he had imagined when he decided to help her. But something inside him, the same thing that had made him go back to that sidewalk to rescue her, couldn't just abandon her now. Isabella, stop crying and look at me, Julian said, getting up from the armchair and kneeling in front of her. Do you really think I'm going to abandon you now? After everything we've been through together, after everything I've discovered about you, he asked, holding her hands in his. But I'm pregnant with another man's baby, Julian. This complicates everything. Your mom already hates me. Imagine when she finds out about this, Isabella said, trying to control herself but still sobbing. My mom has nothing to do with this, and this baby is not to blame for anything. You're not to blame for getting involved with a man who was no good, Julian said, wiping the tears from her face with his fingers. I'm going to take care of you both. You and this child will have everything you need. You'll have a home. You'll have love. You'll have security. I promise you that, he continued, and the sincerity in his voice made Isabella cry even more, but this time from relief. Why are you doing this? Why are you willing to raise another man's child? Isabella asked, still not able to fully believe what she was hearing. Because I fell in love with you, Isabella. I fell in love with the courageous woman you are, with the way you take care of me, with the way you brought life into this house that has always been empty. And if you're expecting a baby, then that baby is also important to me, Julian said. And those words made Isabella's heart almost stop. You fell in love with me? She asked. Her voice choked up, madly. I thought I made that clear before my mom showed up and messed everything up, he replied, with a small but sincere smile. I fell in love with you too, since the first few weeks here, but I was afraid it was just gratitude, Isabella said. And for the first time in days, she smiled through her tears. Then it's settled. We're going to raise this baby together. We're going to be a real family, Julian said. And when he hugged her, Isabella felt as if all the pieces of her life had finally fallen into place. Their embrace was interrupted by a dry cough from the stairs. Eleanor was there, having clearly heard most of the conversation, with a look of horror on her face. Julian, I need to talk to you now, she said, in a voice that brooked no argument. Mom, now is not the time, Julian said, getting up but keeping one hand on Isabella's. "It is exactly the time. You've completely lost your mind," Eleanor said, coming down the rest of the stairs with firm steps. "I knew this girl was hiding something. Now she shows up pregnant with another man's baby, and you, like an idiot, offer to pay for everything. Julian, you've forgotten who you are. You've forgotten everything we fought to achieve," Eleanor said, pointing her finger at Isabella as if she were something disgusting. "This one showed up here with nothing, and now she wants to turn you into a family man for a child that isn't even yours," she continued, with a rage that terrified Isabella. "That's enough, Mom. I won't have you talking about Isabella like that," Julian said, placing himself between the two women. "She's not a gold digger. She's not trying to deceive me. She's an honest woman who went through a difficult situation exactly like we did once, and I chose to help her. I chose to love her, and I chose to take responsibility for her and the baby," he continued, with a firmness in his voice that Isabella had never heard. "You chose to be an idiot, that's what. And I'm not going to stand here watching you throw your life away because of some tramp who showed up pregnant at your door," Eleanor said. And that was the last straw for Julian. "Don't you ever talk about Isabella like that in my presence again. Not ever. She is worth more than you will ever be able to understand," he said, with a controlled but evident rage. "And if you can't accept that, then I think you'd better find somewhere else to stay," he continued. Eleanor was in shock at her son's reaction. In all the years since they had left poverty, Julian had never spoken to her that way. He had never chosen someone else over her. "You're choosing this woman over your own mother?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger and disbelief. "I'm choosing love over prejudice. I'm choosing to build something beautiful instead of being trapped in the past," Julian replied, looking directly into his mother's eyes. "Then you've made your choice. But don't come looking for me when you find out I was right about her," Eleanor said, going upstairs to get her things. "And you, girl," she said, turning to Isabella before going all the way up. "Enjoy it, because men like my son don't show up every day to support other people's mistakes." Isabella felt the words like slaps to her face, but Julian squeezed her hand, conveying strength and security. Half an hour later, Eleanor came down with her suitcase and headed for the door without saying goodbye to her son. "Mom," Julian called out when she was at the doorknob, "when you want to talk like a civilized person, and when you're willing to treat Isabella with respect, you know where to find me." Eleanor slammed the door shut, leaving a heavy silence in the house. "Julian, I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to fight with your mother because of me," Isabella said, still shaken by everything that had happened. "You're not to blame for anything. My mom forgot where we came from. She forgot what it's like to be rejected and humiliated. She became exactly the kind of person who looked down on us when we were poor," Julian said, pulling Isabella into another hug. "Now it's just the three of us," he said, placing his hand gently on her still undeveloped belly. "The three of us against the world, if we have to be." That night, for the first time since they had met, Julian and Isabella slept wrapped in each other's arms on the living room sofa, talking about the future, about their plans for the baby, and about how they would organize their lives from that moment on. It was the official beginning of the family they had chosen to build together, despite all the adversities they might face. Isabella and Julian have decided to face the world together and become a family. What do you think will happen now? Will Eleanor ever truly accept their relationship and the baby? And what will their life look like as they build a new future? The days following Eleanor's departure brought a peace that Isabella hadn't felt in a long time. The house returned to the welcoming and harmonious atmosphere it had before Julian's mother's arrival, but now with an even greater emotional intensity. They had finally embraced their feelings for each other, and the pregnancy, instead of driving them apart, had brought them even closer together. Julian would wake up every morning asking how she was feeling, if she had been sick during the night, and if she needed anything special. It was a care that went far beyond simple concern. It was the care of a man who had chosen to love not only her, but also the child she carried. The first doctor's appointment was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, and Julian made a point of canceling all his commitments to accompany Isabella. He drove to the office with special care, avoiding sudden stops and potholes in the street, as if she were made of glass. "You don't have to be so worried. I'm not going to break," Isabella said, laughing at the way he was treating her. "I know, but I want to take good care of you both from the very beginning," he replied, parking the car in front of the office of Dr. Anya Sharma, an obstetrician who had been recommended by a work colleague. In the waiting room, Isabella noticed how other women looked at them with curiosity. It was obvious that they thought Julian was the baby's father, and that made her a little embarrassed. "Are you sure you want to come into the appointment with me? People will think you're the father," she whispered to him. "I want to be this child's father in every way that matters. I don't care what other people think," Julian replied, taking her hand and intertwining their fingers. "Besides, I want to know everything about the pregnancy. I want to be there for every step of the way," he continued. During the consultation, Dr. Sharma explained everything about the baby's development, the care Isabella needed to take, and the importance of regular prenatal checkups. Julian asked several questions, wrote everything down in a notebook he had brought especially for this, and when the doctor asked about the biological father of the child, he answered naturally. "The biological father is not part of our lives. I will assume all paternal responsibilities." The doctor smiled and said it was beautiful to see a couple so united and prepared to receive a child. When they left the office, Isabella was radiant. It was the first time someone had treated them as a real couple, as a family expecting a baby. "Thank you for doing that," she said, still emotional from the appointment. "For doing what?" Julian asked, genuinely not understanding. "For taking on the role of father, for putting yourself forward as responsible for the baby. It means so much to me," she explained, stopping on the sidewalk and looking directly into his eyes. "Isabella, I wasn't playing a role. I genuinely want to be this child's father," he said, and kissed her right there in front of the office, sealing the commitment they had made. It was their first kiss, and it was everything Isabella had imagined, and so much more. It was a kiss full of love, promises, and hope for the future. When they separated, her cheeks were red, and she had a smile she couldn't hide. "I love you, Julian," she said, speaking those words aloud for the first time. "I love you too, Isabella. I love you, and I love this child that's coming," he replied. And in that moment, they both knew they had made the right choices. Back home, they stopped at a baby store to look at the things they would need to buy. Isabella was enchanted with the tiny clothes, the cribs, and the delicate furniture. But at the same time, she was embarrassed by the prices. "Julian, these things are too expensive. We can buy everything more simply," she said, looking at the price of a crib that cost more than she had earned in several months of work before everything fell apart. "Our baby will have the best of everything. Don't worry about money," he said, calling the salesperson to start choosing the furniture for the room. That afternoon, they transformed one of the guest rooms into a baby room. Julian assembled the crib with special care, while Isabella organized the clothes they had bought in the closets. It was such a natural domestic scene that anyone who saw them would think they were a normal couple, preparing for the arrival of their first child. "Do you think it will be a boy or a girl?" Isabella asked, folding a yellow outfit they had chosen specifically because it was gender neutral. "I don't know, but I hope it has your eyes and your smile," Julian replied, stopping assembling the crib to look at her. The following weeks established an even more intimate routine between them. Julian had hired a housekeeper to come 3 times a week to do the heavy cleaning, insisting that Isabella shouldn't overexert herself. She continued to cook and take care of the house, but now with much more care and affection, because she knew she was taking care of the home of the family they had formed. Every night after dinner, they would sit on the sofa, and Julian would place his hand on her belly, even though there was still nothing to feel. "Do you think he can hear us yet?" he would ask, talking softly to her belly. "Daddy is here, and he's going to take very good care of you and Mommy," he would say, and Isabella would melt with emotion every time she heard it. A month after the first appointment, on the second visit to the doctor, they were able to hear the baby's heartbeat for the first time. Julian held Isabella's hand so tightly it almost hurt, and when they heard that rhythmic and strong sound, they both started to cry with emotion. "That's our baby," he said, kissing her forehead. "It's our baby," Isabella repeated, knowing that in that moment they had officially become a family, regardless of biology or anything else. That night, they made love for the first time. It was something natural and inevitable, full of tenderness and passion. Julian treated her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, with a delicacy that made her fall even more in love with him. "I never imagined I could be so happy," Isabella said, lying on his chest afterwards. "Me neither," he replied. "You brought a meaning to my life that I didn't even know was missing," he said, stroking her hair. 3 days after that special night, Isabella was preparing lunch when she heard the doorbell ring. When she opened the door, she was faced with Eleanor standing on the porch, with a very different expression from the last time they saw each other. It was no longer an expression of rage and contempt, but something closer to resignation. "Can I come in?" Julian's mother asked, and Isabella, even though she was nervous, opened the door for her. "Julian isn't here. He went to work," Isabella said, still not sure how to react. "Actually, I came to talk to you," Eleanor said, and Isabella felt her heart race, not knowing what to expect from this conversation. "Can I sit down?" Eleanor asked, gesturing to the living room. Isabella nodded yes, still completely tense and unsure what to expect from that unexpected visit. The two women sat across from each other, and for a few minutes they were silent, each trying to find the right words to start that difficult conversation. "I came here to apologize," Eleanor finally said, and Isabella was sure she had heard wrong. "What?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "I said horrible things to you. I treated you in a way that wasn't right. And worse, I made my son choose between his own mother and the woman he loves," Eleanor continued, nervously fidgeting with the purse she was carrying. "In these days away from here, I had time to think about a lot of things. I remembered what it was like when Julian and I were on the street. I remembered how people treated us, how painful it was to be judged and looked down upon, and I realized I had become exactly the kind of person who hurt us in the past," she said, her voice choked up. Isabella listened to everything in silence, still processing the radical change in Julian's mother's behavior. "Eleanor, I understand your concern for your son. Any mother would do the same thing," she said, trying to be generous despite all the hurt she still felt. "No, Isabella. What I did wasn't maternal protection. It was pure cruelty. I saw my son happier than he had ever been in his entire life, and instead of being happy for him, I wanted to destroy that happiness," Eleanor replied, with tears in her eyes. "Why did you change your mind?" Isabella asked, genuinely curious about what had caused this transformation. "Because yesterday I ran into an old neighbor of ours, from when we lived in that small room after we got off the street. She told me that her son had married a girl who was pregnant with another man's baby, and that today they have 3 children and are the most united family she knows. When she said that, I realized how hypocritical and prejudiced I was being," Eleanor explained. The two women's conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Julian, who stopped at the living room door with a surprised expression at seeing his mother talking calmly with Isabella. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, clearly tense. "I came to apologize to Isabella, and to you too," Eleanor said, getting up to look her son in the eye. "Julian, I was wrong about everything. Isabella is a wonderful girl, and you two truly love each other. Who am I to try to destroy that?" she continued. Julian looked at Isabella, who nodded discreetly, indicating that the conversation had been a good one. "Mom, I'm glad you've changed your mind, but you hurt Isabella very much. And you hurt me too," he said, still cautious. "I know, son, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you both. If you'll let me, I'd like to be a part of your lives and the baby's. I'd like to be a present and loving grandmother," Eleanor said, extending her hand to Isabella. "Do you forgive me?" she asked. Isabella looked at the outstretched hand, and then at Julian, who was waiting for her decision. She thought of all the cruel words she had heard, of all the tears she had shed because of Eleanor's attacks. But she also thought about the importance of family, how good it would be for the baby to have a present grandmother, and how happy Julian would be if they could reconcile. "I forgive you," she said, shaking Eleanor's hand. "But on one condition, that you treat our family with respect from now on," she continued, with a firmness that surprised everyone. "The family is on the path to reconciliation. But what does the future hold for them? Will Isabella and Julian get married and truly become a family? How will they handle the birth of the baby, and what kind of life will they build together?" The following months were the happiest of Isabella's life. Eleanor kept all the promises she had made, becoming a present and loving mother-in-law. She helped with the preparations for the baby's arrival, gave advice on pregnancy and motherhood, and treated Isabella like the daughter she never had. Isabella's belly grew bigger each week, and Julian became more and more anxious and protective. He went to all the doctor's appointments, set up the baby's room perfectly, and every night he would talk to her belly before bed. When Isabella was 8 months pregnant, Julian surprised her with a marriage proposal. It was one night after dinner, while they were in the living room talking about names for the baby. "Isabella, I have a question for you," he said, kneeling in front of the armchair where she was sitting. "Will you marry me? Will you make our family official before God and men?" he asked, taking a beautiful ring from his pocket. "Yes, I will," she said, without a moment's hesitation. The ring was perfect, delicate but elegant, exactly the way she had always dreamed. "When?" she asked, admiring the jewel on her finger. "After our baby is born. I want them to be our page of honor," Julian said, and that answer made Isabella even more emotional. They set the wedding for 2 months after the baby's due date, and Eleanor offered to help with all the preparations. In the early hours of a Thursday morning, Isabella woke up with strong contractions. "Julian, I think it's time," she said, holding her belly and taking a deep breath. He jumped up completely frantic, running around the house to get the suitcase they had prepared weeks ago. "Calm down, love. Let's go to the hospital calmly," she said, laughing at his anxiety. "How can you be calm at a time like this?" he asked, helping her get dressed. The labor lasted 8 hours, and Julian stayed by Isabella's side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping the sweat from her face and whispering words of encouragement. When they finally heard the baby's first cry, they both broke down in tears of joy. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, placing the child in Isabella's arms. "Our daughter," Julian said, looking at the newborn with an expression of absolute love. "What are we going to name her?" Isabella asked, still too emotional to think straight. "Lilia. Lilia Thorne," Julian said, and Isabella smiled through her tears. It was the perfect name for the child who had united them forever. When Eleanor arrived at the hospital and saw her granddaughter for the first time, she cried so much that the nurses got worried. "She's too beautiful," the grandmother said, holding Lilia with infinite care. "Thank you for giving me this chance to be a grandmother," she said to the couple, completely smitten with her granddaughter. 3 days later, they returned home as a complete family. Julian had prepared to be a father, but he discovered that loving that child was even more natural than he had imagined. He would wake up in the middle of the night for feedings, change diapers with an impressive dedication, and spend hours watching Lilia sleep. "You're a natural father," Isabella said, watching him rock their daughter to sleep. "It's because she's our daughter, really. It doesn't matter who contributed the genes. She is ours," he replied. And Isabella knew that they had created something much stronger than any biological bond. 2 months after Lilia's birth, Julian's house was transformed into a veritable construction site for the wedding preparations. Isabella had insisted on a simple party, but Julian and Eleanor wouldn't have it. "You're going to have the wedding of your dreams," he said, hiring the best vendors in Cambridge to take care of every detail. The ceremony would be in the garden of their own house on a Saturday afternoon, with the presence of the most important people in their lives. Isabella's parents came from the countryside especially for the wedding. When they met Julian and saw how he treated their daughter and granddaughter, they were completely moved. "My daughter found a real man," her father said, shaking Julian's hand with gratitude. "Thank you for taking such good care of our girl," her mother said, hugging her son-in-law with affection. They stayed at the house for a week, and it was the first time Isabella felt truly complete, with her whole family gathered. "I never imagined I would get married as a mother," Isabella told Eleanor one afternoon, while trying on the wedding dress they had chosen together. It was a simple but elegant model that perfectly disguised the fact that she was still breastfeeding. "And I never imagined I would have a daughter-in-law and a granddaughter at the same time," Eleanor replied, carefully adjusting the veil. "But you know, this is the best thing that has ever happened in Julian's life. He has never been so happy," her mother-in-law continued. On the morning of the wedding, Isabella woke up to Lilia crying in the crib next to the bed. "Good morning, princess," she said, picking up her daughter to feed her. "Today is the day Mommy and Daddy are going to get officially married," she whispered to the baby, who looked at her with those curious little eyes. Julian came into the room with a breakfast tray, even though it was considered bad luck for the groom to see the bride on the wedding day. "I don't believe in those superstitions," he said, kissing the foreheads of the 2 women in his life. The ceremony was perfect. The garden was decorated with white and pink flowers. There was a makeshift altar under the banyan, old tree at the back of the property. Lilia slept the whole time in Eleanor's arms, as if she knew she needed to be quiet during her parents' ceremony. When it was time for the vows, Isabella and Julian had prepared their own words to say to each other. "Julian, when you found me on that sidewalk, I had lost all hope. You didn't just save me from the street. You saved me from a life without love, without purpose, without a family. You chose to love me when I had nothing to offer, and you chose to be Lilia's father when she wasn't even born yet. Today, I promise you that I will be the best wife and mother I can be, and that I will take care of our family with all the love in my heart," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Isabella, you brought light into a life that I didn't even know was empty. You taught me that true wealth is not in the money we accumulate, but in the love we build. You gave me a family. You gave me a purpose. You gave me a reason to wake up every day wanting to be a better man. I promise you that I will love you and Lilia forever, that I will protect our family from anything, and that I will never forget how lucky I am to have you both in my life," Julian said. And there wasn't a single person in the audience who wasn't crying. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," their kiss was accompanied by the applause of all the guests and the crying of Lilia, who had woken up at that very moment, as if she knew it was time to celebrate. "Now we are officially the Thorne family," Julian said, picking up his daughter and kissing his wife at the same time. The party lasted until late at night, with lots of music, dancing, and good food. Isabella's parents talked all night with Eleanor, exchanging stories and making plans to visit each other often. "Now we're in-laws," Isabella's father said to Julian, and the two men sealed their friendship with a sincere hug. For their honeymoon, they went to a romantic inn in a nearby town, taking Lilia with them. It wouldn't be the same without her, Isabella said, when Julian suggested leaving the baby with Eleanor for a few days. They spent a wonderful week, walking in the mornings, resting in the afternoons, while Lilia slept, and being intimate at night after their daughter fell asleep. A year after the wedding, Isabella discovered she was pregnant again. This time, it was Julian's child, and their joy was overflowing. Lilia is going to have a little brother, Isabella said. Our family is growing, he replied, kissing her still flat belly, and then picking up Lilia. Daughter, you're going to be a big sister, he said to the 1.5-year-old girl, who clapped her hands without really understanding what was happening. Eleanor was radiant with the news of her second grandchild. This time, I'll be able to follow the pregnancy from the beginning, she said, already making plans to help even more with the children's care. Isabella's parents were also emotional, especially when they learned it would be a boy. Now we'll have one of each, her mother said during a call. On a Sunday afternoon, while Lilia was playing in the garden and Isabella was resting with her already big belly from her second child, Julian sat next to his wife and watched the scene. What are you thinking about? She asked, noticing his contemplative gaze. I'm thinking about how life can change completely in just a few years. 3 years ago, I was a lonely man who thought I didn't need anyone. Today, I have a wonderful wife, a beautiful daughter, another baby on the way, and a family I never imagined could exist, he said. And I'm thinking that sometimes God puts us in the most difficult situations to lead us exactly where we need to be, Isabella replied, intertwining her fingers with his. If I hadn't gone through all that pain, I never would have found you. I never would have discovered what it's like to be truly loved and protected, she continued, looking at Lilia, who was running after a butterfly in the garden. Mommy, Daddy, look at the butterfly, Lilia shouted, pointing to the colorful insect flying among the flowers. The two of them laughed at their daughter's excitement, and Julian got up to play with her. Isabella watched her husband running in the garden with their daughter in his arms, and knew she had found exactly where she belonged. She had a family. She had love. She had security. And she was sure that no matter what the future brought, they would face everything together. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of another story that teaches us about the transformative power of true love. Isabella and Julian's journey shows us that sometimes we need to go through the most difficult storms of life to find the safe harbor we've always been looking for. Isabella, who started our story abandoned and hopeless on a cold Cambridge sidewalk, found not just a home, but a complete family. Julian, who lived focused only on work and money, discovered that true wealth lies in the love we build and share. And Eleanor learned that a difficult past should not make us hard-hearted, but rather more compassionate to the suffering of others. The story reminds us that everyone deserves a second chance, that true love knows no prejudice or social barriers, and that a family is built with daily choices of care, respect, and mutual dedication. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next narratives, and share it with someone who needs to believe that better days can always come. Comment below, telling us your city and how this story made you feel. May God bless each of you, and until the next story,